And why ask about fate? Because that is the one thing which, if you just wait a while, you can be certain you will find out about anyway. Hello, you're listening to the English version of the bilingual podcast, 3 Notes, 3 Quotes, that go by you. In each episode, I will introduce you to a book through 3 quotes and 3 things from it that I find memorable. Stay with me until the end to find out why I chose the opening quote of today's episode, as well as why you should give this book a try. In the previous episode, I talked about a book you could flip through and read from any page, while today I will introduce a work completely opposite in nature. Beholder's Planetarium isn't really a book in the literal sense, being published as a paperback or an e-book as we're commonly used to. The closest description of this work would probably be an interactive storytelling environment. The story is told through 12 parts. Each part carries 3 small answers that will lead to the solution of the overarching puzzle of the story. The special feature of this story is the fact that readers cannot read all 12 parts at once, or skip previous parts to jump ahead to another, but can only read 1 part per week in the intended order. The mystery, the sequencing, as well as the compulsory wait, is an integral part of the work. This is a story told in the same way that life unfolds, unforeseenable, unavoidable, unskippable. And because of this, I can only quote and talk about the first part. As for the rest, if you want to know and are ready to go on this 12-week journey, then follow the link I put in the description. After the introduction, you can probably feel that the sequencing and linearity of time is an important element of the story. However, the 2 main characters, as well as the supporting characters of this story, seem to be on a completely different trajectory compared to the reader's perspective. The mathematician seems to be able to identify every variable and calculate the likelihood of each future event in many different directions. And the girl in the story, whose name no one knows, is trapped in a situation that is both ironic and unique. She only knows the future and cannot remember the past. These 2 people represent the realization of very common dreams of mankind, forgetting the past and foreseeing the future. But whether or not dreams coming true equals happiness is difficult to tell. However, in this world, there is one thing that remains constant, and that is change. As part 1 of the story begins, there is some kind of change initiated in the future, coming to its end at the present, manifesting itself in the letter that the nameless girl holds in her hand, along with the inexplicable appearance of a weasel who has successfully completed the last leg of a mission. And readers, if they can go all the way until the end of this 12-week journey, will probably find themselves the second constant of life, and will understand why I decided on the quote below as the first quote of this podcast episode. The present is the bottleneck, and the only reason most human pasts are not more untidy than they are is that we can only manage 1 mistake at a time. That bottleneck is the pinch in the hourglass, the restrictor, which means events must pass us by 1 single grain at a time. We could take this as an opportunity to see things clearly, but it seems we'd rather not. Most of us prefer to speculate hopelessly in the unfathomable scale of the future, or flounder hopelessly in the massive scale of the past. If the first quote depicts the big picture of time, the second is probably more about the place of the past in the hearts of human beings. This position is represented by a cat, more precisely, a 3-legged cat being held in the arms of the nameless girl of our story. At this point, it is difficult to know specifically why this cat has an uneven number of legs, just like the human past is often summed up by the phrase, "hard to say all in one breath." Again, if you want to know what happened to the cat, you have to accept going on a 12-week journey. Just like in life, to know what happened to someone, you have to be willing to spend time accompanying and befriending that person. If you have listened to my first podcast episode, you'll probably find this motive a little familiar. Humans have a habit of asking questions and demanding answers right away, but most of the time, instant replies aren't the answers you need. Just as the odd number of legs does not make the cat a cat no longer, what happens to a human being does not represent the entirety of that person's existence. And so, in a way, it is fortunate that the cat with a past is being held by a girl who can't recall the past and only knows about the future. I'll leave you here to experience the feeling of being a cat with an odd number of legs via the second quote. Lose a limb, and everyone you meet loses their focus. It works as surely for cats as it does for humans. Strangely, what should have been a cat becomes superseded by an event. What happened? If you listened to the podcast episode from the beginning, you will already know what the third quote is. If you skip the first part, you will have to wait until the end or rewind or skip again to find out. And if you have listened to the first episode of this channel, you'll once again find this motive a little familiar. Here for you is another of life's little ironies. Sometimes doing things sequentially instead of taking shortcuts leads you much more quickly to the goal. We've gone through the big picture of time, through the placement of the past, so now let Beholder's Planetarium take you to the future. For a mere mortal like me, and probably many others, the future is unknown. But for the two main characters of the story, the future is just a series of events waiting for their turn to take place. Just like sand must flow grain by grain through the pinch of the hourglass. Although these two characters each has a different way of seeing the future, there is an implicit understanding between them that makes them leave society and accompany each other even before this 12-week adventure begins. And that is, the future, even though can be foreseen, still needs to be experienced individually, sequentially, one event at a time. This is the reason, despite already knowing the events lying ahead, these two characters still choose to walk into the 12-week journey. And so for us, who already know what the third quote is, let's also choose to continue listening, as events need to be experienced when the moments take place. And why ask about fate? Because that is the one thing which, if you just wait a while, you can be certain you will find out about anyway. If you've been listening from the beginning of the episode to this point, you're probably wondering, what about the now? Doesn't Beholder's Planetarium have anything to say about the present? But if you actually listened this far, then you also know that having an instant reply doesn't mean getting the answer you need. At this point, you have a choice. You may, or may not, want to spend a little time each week, read one and only one per week, part of a 12-part story. And if you choose yes, then the future may await you with an answer worthy of the 12 weeks you read and wait. I myself come back every few years to reread the story, to go on this 12-week journey, just like many fans of this work have also done, and are still doing, since 1999. If you already read this book, what is your favorite quote from the book? If you haven't, do any of the things I talked about earlier remind you of any other books you know? No one can read all the books in the world on their own, so don't be afraid to share the books we love with others. At least do tell me. Always here waiting.